Welcome back to Nomad Nation. Today we're going to be working on a 2012 JKU that has rear axle bearings that are going out. You can grab a hold of the tire on the top and bottom and rock it back and forth and hear it clunking. So the bearing has given out. He has opted to go ahead and put an upgraded Chromoly axle in. So that's what we're going to be doing today. Okay, so now that we went ahead and pulled the tires off, first thing that we're going to do is to pull the brake caliper off. It's just two 18mm bolts on the back side here. And now that we have both those bolts off, what we're gonna do, what I do, is I take a bungee cord, pull the brake caliper straight off, and I'll hang it from the frame up here in one of these holes. That's just so that you don't put any extra strain on this brake line. These are the extended ones, so these won't tear as easy, but if you have the factory rubber ones, they'll tear real easy. You don't want to put any extra strain on them. Next thing that we're gonna do is right here on the back, there's the ABS wheel speed sensor. All I do is I take a flathead, and there's a red clip down here on the bottom. You just have to pop it out if it hasn't been already previously. They can be a pain, so just like that. They're not supposed to come all the way out, but sometimes they do. This one's previously been broke. And then there's a little button that you have to push on the bottom side. You just wiggle the wire up and down, and it comes off. Okay, now that we've got the brake caliper off and the ABS sensor unplugged, we're gonna go ahead and pull the brake rotor off. It should just slide off on a JK. And then on the back here, you have four nuts that hold the axle into place. You need to pull all four of those off. You can see right here, you have a bolt here on the bottom, a bolt on the top, and you have two on the front side of the axle that are in the same places on the top and the bottom.
What size are they?
They're an 18mm, just like the brake caliper is. Okay, now that we've pulled the back two off here, we got to come around to this side and pull these two off. Okay, so now that we've got all four of the nuts off the back side of the axle here, you can see on the bottom here there's oil. This is actually differential fluid that's been leaking past the seal because this bearing is bad. Okay, now that we've got all the bolts out, the only thing that we have to do is just pull the axles straight out. Sometimes you have to use some force to get them out, like just hitting it with a hammer. And of course, these want to be stuck. Just like that. Okay, now that we've got the axle shaft out, we have to remove the old inner bearing race right here. Typically, you can just take a pry bar and pop them out. Just like that. Okay, so now that we've got the axle shaft out of the Jeep, the next thing we need to do is to remove the parking brake assembly with the dust shield. So the first thing that we're going to do is right here, there's an ABS sensor. Just has one 8mm bolt that holds it in place. Just need to remove it and set it off to the side because we're going to reuse it. And then you shouldn't have to pull the park brake apart to get it off of there. This one will actually talking your way through. Yeah. Just got to walk back and forth and it'll slide off. So now that we've got it free, we just have to slide it off the axle shaft. And that is our brake assembly there. All of this stuff that is here is all getting replaced with the new kit. And here's our new axle shaft that's going to be going back in. As you can see, it doesn't have any of the lug nut studs, the bearing, the retainer, or anything on it. We have to put all of that stuff on the new axle. The kit came with all new lug nut studs to be pressed in. So the kit also came with a brand new ABS tone ring. This is a brand new axle retainer, brand new seal, bearing, and this is a retaining ring. Pressing the new studs, I use a ball joint press. It makes it a lot easier. Okay, now that we've got all the new lug nut studs pressed in, we can go to our parts here. First thing that goes on is the tone ring, and these are pressed on. You will need a press to do that. So now the first thing that we're going to do is press this ABS tone ring in. You will need to have a press to do this. It makes it a lot easier. Now that we've got the ABS tone ring on, next thing that we put on is the retainer plate, and it just sits there. It doesn't have to be pressed on. Next is our axle seal, and this is what was leaking on the old axle. Should just be able to slide it. The next thing is our bearing. The bearing will have to be pressed on too. And then the last thing to be pressed on is also that ring. Now we just need to put this keeper on there. And we'll press this on the rest of the way, and that'll set the bearing height. Okay, so here you can see that we have the old axle shaft with the wore out seal and bearings here. And this is our new one after we've got it all put together. It came with a brand new inner race that'll go in the axle housing. And you can actually set it on that bearing before you slide it in, and it'll all go in as one piece. You can tell whenever I press the bearing on, it stopped. And it had to go past that point. Whenever we pressed this new keeper on, we were able to set it all the way down and up against the stop that it needed to be on, which is just a lip on the axle shaft right there. Okay, so now that we've got all that back together, I just take a rag and clean up as much of the old oil in here that you can. And now we're ready to reassemble our park brake assembly and dust backing plate on the axle. Make sure you put it on the right way. It just slides over the 4 studs here, and then all you have to do is take your ABS wheel speed sensor, slide it into place, put the bolt back in it, tighten it down, and now it's ready to go back on the Jeep. Okay, so now that we have everything put back together, all you have to do is take it, slide it back in the housing, and then you have to kind of wiggle them around and get them lined up with the carrier in the middle. Once you get it lined up, the axle shaft will just slide right into place. And then take your 4 nuts that you pulled off to, well, I lost them. Okay, so now that we've got the axle into place, we just take the 4 nuts that we took off originally and put them back into place on the 4 studs that are in the axle keeper. Now that you have all 4 of them started on there, all you got to do is just tighten down the 4 nuts and the axle is installed. Now that everything is put in and tightened up and the axle's in place, if you remember before, we had play up and down in the axle, and just even a small screwdriver on the old one, you could see it moving. The only thing that I'm moving here is just this brake shoe. It does not move at all, which tells you that that is where there was a lot of play was in that bearing. Now that the axle's in place, we're just going to continue putting everything back together. First thing to go on is the brake rotor. Next thing that we're going to do here is plug in our ABS wheel speed sensor. Just like that. Now that we have our ABS sensor plugged in, take our brake caliper and our 2 bolts, just slide it back on there. Okay, so that about wraps this up. The only thing left for us to do here is just put the tire on. Then we are going to do the other side, and it's the same exact process of what we did over here. So if you can follow along and do one side like we did it here, you can do the other side too. It's the same thing. Thanks for watching. Remember to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss any future episodes, and we'll see you next time.